So, welcome everyone. That was a scary beginning, wasn't it? And maybe it's going to be a little scary evening, actually. I don't know if you've ever been hacked or phished or spoofed. I have actually been phished. It's not a nice experience. So tonight we will dive into the world of cybersecurity. Of course, in these times of the virus, we're online all the time. So this is an ideal circumstance for, well, people who want to take an advantage of that. Digital crimes, DDoS attacks, ransomware. The thieves are everywhere online. But don't worry, tonight we have in our studio as our special guest, a specialist in internet security, Eiko Pras. Welcome, wonderful that you're here. We'll speak much more later. And we'll also have a specialist on cyber safety of our own University of Twente as our online guest, Marielle Stulinga. Also, welcome here. And the question is, of course, do we indeed have such a nice firewall as LUVANE just showed us in this wonderful intro movie? Then, as always, Erik Kemp will show us his column on data, where this time the topic is how big the influence of the Big Five is, the Big Five internet companies. What does this mean for our own University of Twente, for our own sovereignty? And we also have a look behind the scenes of What the Hack, a very successful podcast by Diederik Bakker, Olaf Haalstra, Jasper Boot. And last but certainly, of course, not least, as every month, we have a cultural intermezzo, Jazz Dance Association, Chassé. But first, Eiko, welcome. Wonderful that you're here. Wonderful that you that you want to be our guest, working as the chair of network operations and management with a special focus on internet security at the University of Twente, and also one of the founders of Tucker. It's a funny name, of course, the Twente University Center for Cybersecurity Research. We'll talk about Tucker later, but maybe just to get straight to the point, how safe do you feel in these times of the virus?
I feel safe.
Yeah.
I know that people try everything, but I feel relatively safe.
And is it because you have installed a lot of software on your computer that keeps you safe, or is it okay in our country? Or
people say that I have more protection than the average person, but I'm a nerd, so maybe I'm the average nerd in that sense. But I know that whatever you do, if people want to break you, if secret services would like to get into my systems, they can.
They can?
Yeah.
Okay. And I mean, do you think there is indeed an increase of attacks? I mean, should we feel a bit less secure? Yeah.
You absolutely see that also some of the criminals are not allowed to leave after 9 o'clock anymore, so they have to do something else to get their money. So they do, crime on the internet.
They change the business model.
Yes, they're changing their business model. That's absolutely clear.
Okay. So, and I mean, is it something that you also advise on? I mean, can you help people to somewhat protect themselves against this?
Well, I'm not someone who is basically giving practical hints. You should do this, you should do that, you should do that. But to give you an example, I will not mention the place, but there is a place not too far away which was a victim of ransomware. And I talked with a couple of people there. And so if you look at, say, the politicians there, they said, yeah, why can this happen, etc. And what I asked them is, do you know the site basisbeveiliging.nl, which is a site that gives per city basically how secure it is, and that is in green, in orange and in red, and everyone can see that. It's extremely simple, but people don't know that. So these very simple things, I sometimes try to help people. Well, take a look at this, take a look at that. That helps already.
Wow. It's also, I mean, amazing how dependent we have become on the internet. In fact, I mean, suppose that the internet would stop functioning. So, of course, I mean, that's maybe a weird situation, but do you have any idea what could happen then?
Well, basically, this is one of the talks that I love to give. And for the Universiteit van Nederland, I gave such a talk. But it, of course, depends. If no one knows what is exactly happening and the internet breaks down, then our society will break down. And that will go extremely fast. Because even if the internet collapses, then politicians are no longer able to talk with local police or whatever. So that will completely go wrong. And then you can ask yourself, but how is the risk that this happens? Well, I don't think there's a risk that it will technically break. But the risk is that political actors that do this kind of attack. So if you look at Estonia, for example, they have been attacked by the Russians, I think already in 2007. Wow. If you look at the Ukraine, it is continuously under attack. And it is, say, the electricity grid that is under attack. They have had electricity outages because of these attacks that lasted many days. So it's a serious threat.
Okay, so that's probably what's under attack then. It's not only the internet accessibility, but also all the devices that are connected on the internet. So the Internet of Things. There
are so many things where we rely on the internet that people have no clue anymore.
Yeah, incredible. So, I mean, is it likely that such a thing could happen here in the Netherlands?
Well, it depends on the political situation. And it depends what other countries want from us. So let me give an example. If the Netherlands would take a very firm position against China, then we shouldn't be surprised that a country like China somehow wants to teach us a lesson, and that we get into serious problems because they will attack stuff. If you just look at the mistake that was made by most likely the Russian Secret Service, where they wanted to attack some Ukrainian power plants. But it spread a little bit more, and the harbor of Rotterdam was out of service, or parts of the Rotterdam harbor were out of service for 2 weeks or something like that. I heard somewhere that the costs were €800 million.
800 million.
Yeah, so that's incredible. So and that's just one mistake.
Behind your computer, you can cause damage of €800 million.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Oh. So, I mean, of course, we've seen a lot of attacks now of universities even, etc. But this would be bigger. This could indeed, mean serious damage to a country and also destabilizing a society, maybe.
Yeah, but I guess that most people don't understand yet how dependent we have become on the internet and all the services. And second, that nation states will use that to increase their influence. And people are naive in that sense, that they think that normal warfare, oh yes, sure, we must have an army, we have to protect ourselves, we have to have weapons, but cyber attacks, why would a country attack me? And people are extremely naive in that.
The real war will be fought online.
Yes, absolutely.
That's what you think. Yeah. Wow, incredible. So what does Tucker do to help us here? Because we are not only here to talk about negative things, but also about what we can do.
Of course in Tucker we do scientific research, but we already did that before we had Tucker. And because we have this collaboration with industry, we have more means. But I guess the biggest thing is that we have public-private collaboration. So we try to learn from each other. So instead of sitting on the ivory tower, what people sometimes think of universities, we really want to work together with industry to see where we can find solutions, what are the real problems. Basically, it's community building in this area.
And does that mean that you also learn things from the industry as much as they learn? Yeah. So
I can give many examples where we've learned stuff from industry.
So could you mention an example?
To give you one example, I guess it was 2013 or something like that. We were visiting SurfNet. And at that time I gave a lecture on internet security and I wanted to remove DDoS attacks because no one was doing that. And then there's a side remark. They said, oh yeah, we have now DDoS attacks. I was looking at DDoS attacks. I just want to remove it from my course. Is anyone still doing it? Oh yes, look at this. And then we spent an hour looking what is exactly happening. One of my PhD students, Javier Santana, was there as well. And that motivated him immediately to dive into that. Wow. And that became the topic of his thesis. Wow. That became the topic of DDoS clearinghouse that we have now in the Netherlands. So there's a strong collaboration. And that's also something that's in Europe extremely visible.
So DDoS, for people who have not heard of it, is that, you get a lot of signals to a server that has to respond to so many signals that it will stop functioning, right? Yes. So it's a way to cancel out a server.
The DDoS attack at this moment would be if I would talk so much to you that you can't even say anything back.
You have to talk a lot.
You have a good protection mechanism.
Super interesting. Well, you already mentioned the enormous importance of the internet, that people hardly realize it. So maybe one of the important elements of this is also our dependence on what people have come to call the big five, and the big tech internet companies. Alphabet, Google basically, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft. Erik Kemp dedicated his monthly column, Show Me the Data, to the enormous influence of these big five. So let's have a look.
Hi! In this fourth episode of Show Me the Data, we will dive into personal data and the world of big tech. One of the biggest problems of our digital world is the information asymmetry. We don't know which information is being collected about us and how that data is being used to manipulate us. We will first look at the charts published by journalistic platform The Correspondent. Let's start with these line charts showing the market value of the 10 biggest companies per sector, comparing finance, pharma, oil and tech. This gives some context to the big in big tech, because you can see that their size is of a completely different order than the other industries. You might wonder, how did these companies become so big? You could think that they are innovative and visionary, but what they are really doing is buying all possible competitors whenever they get too big. This effectively creates a monopoly for those big companies. The next visualization shows just that. These are the big five of the tech industry, where Alphabet is the parent company of Google. Every tiny bubble is a company. Let's see what happens. The companies that are taken over are usually in areas where they don't have much data yet, such as education and finance. But most are in the field of artificial intelligence, which thrives on massive amounts of data. You might recognize some of the names that have been bought by the big five. Instagram was bought by Facebook, LinkedIn by Microsoft, YouTube by Google. The takeaway of this visualization is that we should realize that for a large part of our digital infrastructure, we are dependent on just a few giants. So now we got some information on a macro level. But the information asymmetry also plays a role on the individual level. Do you know which data is being collected about you? I don't think so. Fortunately, the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, gives us the right to request a copy of all our personal data stored by a particular service. But this received data is hard to understand or analyze by yourself. Totally in the spirit of Show Me the Data, the Fraunhofer Institute created an amazing tool for exactly this. It is called Transparency Viz, and it helps you gain insights in your own data. They also show you how you can request a copy of your data, so that's what I did. What you see now is my personal internet activity on several platforms. Every circle is an activity, and you can see the details by hovering over it. But I want to show you how powerful just this overview can be. Do you notice something peculiar about my online behavior? And now if I tell you that I've had multiple depressions over the past years, look at the chart again. Do you notice the empty vertical bands where I was very passive for months? You have to realize that for these big tech companies, we are the product, not the customer. Our well-being is not their primary interest, and in our weakest moments, we might act more impulsively. I hope you see that a company having so much personal information about you can be very problematic. Our democracies are based on the idea that every individual is sovereign in their actions and decisions. But this sovereignty is threatened. I encourage you to discover the data behind your own internet activity by using this tool. And remember, the internet never forgets.
So that was an impressive column, I think. I mean, they're always good, but Erik, I don't know if you're watching, but this was, until now, the best you've made, I think. Impressive, both in terms of seeing the power of the big tech and also in terms of what it can mean for you personally. So he spoke a lot about digital sovereignty, a term I think you also sometimes use, right? So what does it take to keep up your sovereignty amidst these huge giants?
Yeah, you can give many answers, but you can also be very, very pragmatic. And if you take the pragmatic answer, it is basically don't put all your data into these 5 companies, because once you do that, you probably never get out. If you look at our university, for example, you see that we are moving more and more to the Microsoft Office cloud because it's so easy. If you look in, say, the last couple of months, you've seen enormous amount of attacks on Microsoft Exchange servers. What's the consequence now? Many people say, oh, it's so hard to patch these Microsoft products. Let's move all our mail to Microsoft, because then they will do it for us. But there's so many problems associated with that, and people don't really understand that.
Wow. Okay, so it's the ease, but of course it becomes easier because the power is with all these big tech companies. But it has been said a lot, but I mean, it feels so weird that public infrastructure, right? I mean, we cannot live without the internet, is in the hands of commercial companies. So it feels like a very, well, you could say American model, a very liberal model, without too much eye for our own community. More about an entrepreneur can be successful, and there's nothing you should do about it. Is there anything that we could do against that? I mean, how do you fight this power?
If you look at the model of these models, I sometimes use the Hotel California complex. You can check in any time, but you can never leave. Yeah. And that's what people don't realize. They are attracted now by very nice terms, but if you want to get out, you can't get out. And still, of course, there will be many people who deny that. But if you look at the facts, they make it harder and harder and harder to get out. It's also the opposite. Why do we move to, say, the Office cloud? Well, because it's so easy. Yeah. And if you look at the impact of that for foreign students, so Iranians, they can't see their stuff if they're now with COVID in Iran. What about China? They might be blocked. If you just saw Erik's blog, and he was very open what the experience that he got. But do you want that commercial companies will be able to see all the data from our students? Will be technically able to analyze your email, and do you trust the NSA that they don't do that? And would you like to put your students into danger that this is happening? To be honest, I don't understand why students don't massively protest against it, and why the University Council is not massively against that.
It's incredible. I still recall the farewell lecture of Jan van Dijk. I'm not sure if you were there, a Twente professor of media sociology, who had this big plea for a European social network, or a European internet even, saying that, okay, these European values, freedom, solidarity, equality, they should be at the basis, not only individual entrepreneurship or something. So maybe we should speak about that later to see if that could be somehow realized. But let's now also turn to Marielle Stoelinga, who is working very actively in the field of risk management of high-tech systems at the UT, as a full professor, and also quantitative risk assessment of software systems at the Radboud University in Nijmegen. Welcome, Marielle. Wonderful that you're here. So how do you feel about this? Do you also feel that Microsoft and Google are, somehow in your neck? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, sure. It's very much a mixed blessing. As Aiko said, Microsoft and Google, they provide extremely user-friendly products, searching the internet, sharing documents, all very easy to do. And well, except for Microsoft, these companies are all digital natives. So they were born after the internet. They know how the internet works. They know the law of the internet market. And if we compare that to the Netherlands, to the Dutch government, and so if we want to provide an alternative, like a European internet, a lot has to happen.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, and maybe also an awareness of people that this happens. I mean, if I see you, I always have to think about the plea that you made, I think 2 years ago, that we need a nerd of the nation, somebody who is able to explain in accessible terms to people in politics how urgent the situation is. So
Yeah.
maybe I have to ask you, are you the nerd of the nation already, or what should we do to help you?
Well, indeed, but these corona times show that the nerd of the nation is more needed than ever. If we look at the problems at the GGD and how politicians reacted to that, it shows that politicians have a lot to learn when it comes to security, to safety.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, we have seen actually a lot of quite serious things over the past period. Also in our own academic circles, like Maastricht University was hacked about a year ago, a bit longer than a year ago. NWO, I think many of us have experienced a big delay in reporting about your grants or submitting grant proposals, etc. So it's quite serious. What can we do, according to you and to your own research, to counter these cyber attacks?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that people and organizations can do to protect themselves against cyber attacks. And actually, it's not one best defense that the UT or other organizations should implement. People should really do all of them. And this is really a mix of technical, human, and organizational measures. And I guess people basically know them. Install your security updates. Firewalls should be in place. Use strong passwords. Use a password manager. And also very important, be resilient. Organizations should, in my opinion, create a cyber recovery strategy. So a plan that if an organization is attacked, how can they recover? For instance, the university could come up with a plan so that still a minimal form of education and research can happen after an attack.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Because, well, attacks can happen to everybody.
Yeah, wow. So that indeed is maybe something that most organizations actually have never realized, right? That you should stay also, well, many miles ahead maybe of the people who attack the organization. So, I mean, if I now think of our own university, the UT, in these times where we have become fully dependent on the internet, of course, and also on our own IT systems, what do you think about UT? Are we safe? Can we trust that we can keep working the coming month? Or are we in a risky zone, you think?
Well, we've just hired an integral safety manager, so for sure we are cyber safe.
Okay. No, but there's more to say probably than this one personal.
No, but as I said, 100% security doesn't exist, so we better make sure that we're well prepared with this mix of measures that I was just talking about, organizational measures. I mean, it's also very important that in an organization there's one person at the boardroom responsible for security, and of course then an integral safety manager can help.
Yeah, and is this something you believe that individual universities should do, or is there also something we could do at a more collective level, at the VSNU level, the Association of All Universities, for instance? Yeah,
of course.
So
if you can do things together, this is much better. You can learn from each other. I think also in the hack at the Maastricht University, the whole VSNU has been involved also in the recovery.
So, indeed, so that could be really helpful if we would do that. I was also thinking of, I mean, we put our faith a lot in the hands of Google and Microsoft and the big tech companies. Couldn't they also help us somehow? Could they help us to stay more secure, or should we actually stay away from putting our faith too much in our faith too much in their hands? Yeah.
Well, as I just said, it's really a mixed blessing, because on the one hand, we see that those digital natives that are very resilient. I mean, last year, Google had a downtime of, I think, even less than an hour, and this was big world news. Compare this to Dutch banks or paying with ideals, that is down much more often. So they provide good services. easy to use, as we said. But indeed, it's questionable if we should give up all our autonomy.
And do we have an alternative? I mean, that's maybe what people always ask themselves. If we don't go to them, where do we go then?
Well, I think it would be wonderful if in Europe or even in the Netherlands we had the skills to create an alternative. But then I would say let's raise awareness. Let's educate more people. Let's also start educating kids about security, so that indeed we build up the expertise and the digital skills that are needed to build such a more resilient solution, more autonomous solutions in-house. In the EU or in the Netherlands.
Yeah. So we don't need one nerd of the nation. We need a few thousand nerds of the nation, at least. So, Eiko, if you hear this, do you agree with Marielle?
Absolutely. But there are many things that we can do, and we already do. So if you look at clouds, Europe has taken the initiative for Gaia X, which is a European cloud initiative, which I think is extremely important. If you look at what we could do as university in collaborating, why don't we outsource more to SURF? We are the owners of SURF. Samenwerken de universitaire rekenfaciliteiten. Working together is in their name, and we own it. So why don't we outsource more to SURF? Why don't we do the email and more stuff by them? So I do understand the necessity to scale up. Certainly small organizations can't do everything themselves. But scaling up doesn't automatically mean that you have to go to the highest level and put everything into these 5 companies.
If we outsource it to SURF, that would concretely mean that our mail servers are at SURF, not at Microsoft anymore.
Yes.
And our email address stays at u20.nl, but it would be SURF managing all the data. And is SURF big enough and reliable enough to provide that service?
Absolutely.
Then it's indeed quite a miracle that we don't do that.
It is a miracle, and if you realize, I don't know if you've seen the news today, but city of Enschede got a fine from the because the Wi-Fi tracking.
So how do you say that in English? The privacy and security organization. I don't know what the right translation would be.
But that was because they did Wi-Fi tracking, and that's something that you could have predicted that it would happen. And although I do think the fine is too high, but it was something predictable. If you now look at that, we put everything into, say, the US clouds. It is predictable that European laws will soon tell that this is no longer accepted and that we will have to pay fines and we have to go out. There are many people who say, and these are legal experts, that this is something where we just have to wait till the highest European court will tell this is not allowed. And so instead of trying to do something which is very risky, build up something which is certain for the longer period. Do it with SURF.
So, Marielle, if you would advise SURF on making a real secure email server, are there specific things based on your research on risk that we should take into account to have a real secure internet?
Well, I think SURF is pretty secure. If I were SURF, I would rather invest in user friendliness, because let's face it, security is a hassle. It's inconvenient. If I see how much time I spend on a day searching for the keys of my bike, that's insane. And this is all about security, so that burglars don't walk away with my bike. So a reason for people not to be secure is also, the effort it takes. And I think technically SURF is doing well, but in terms of user-friendly, they could still win.
That seems to be a catch-22, Eiko.
I would like to comment on that, because I recognize what you say, but if we don't invest in our own infrastructure, it will never get at a level which is comparable to the others. So if we give all the money to our competitors, then we shouldn't complain that we are doing a lousy job. So we have to put money not to Google and to Microsoft, but to SURF, and then they will be able to hire the right people to make it more user friendly.
I mean, we just spoke about. Yeah, okay. So that's interesting, Marielle. So what's the other side of the story then? What do we also need to support according to you?
No, of course. And the question is, are we first going to use Surf so that they have money to make it more user friendly, or do we say no? We first make it user friendly so that automatically people will use Surf more.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yeah. So that seems to be the dilemma somehow. So it's so easy to go to the big tech; they have it all perfect, and then at the same time we make ourselves totally vulnerable. So in that sense, you're both right. I think if Surf would manage to make it as smooth as the big tech companies could do,
but do we want to be in a situation that at a certain moment the European highest court tells us that we're no longer allowed to do the ICT as we have done over the last period of years?
Yeah.
I think we should never want to get into such a situation. So we have to invest in something that will be mature for a long period.
At the beginning of this episode, we also spoke a bit about the Internet of Things. And that makes it maybe even more scary, right? So your TV set that can spy on you, your CV installation, your thermostat, your doorbell, etc. And so that probably brings an extra level of risk here. So how should we deal with that? Should we also have a European standard for that? That's super complicated, right?
Well, some people have the idea, let's manufacture everything ourselves, but that's completely ridiculous. That's not going to happen. So the best that we can do is to check that stuff is relatively secure. Okay. But we still have to rely on IoT devices that come from China.
Yeah, we have to rely on them. You say
yes, because there's no alternative.
Yeah,
if you look at the market, everything has already gone there.
Yeah. So Marielle, you're an expert in risk. So how could we assess the risk of these IoT devices coming from other places
the
in the world?
Internet of Things is notorious for the lack of security. So I think almost all Internet of Things devices have been hacked, be it the bridge in Rotterdam, the Erasmus Bridge, or smart water cookers, etc. It's really easy to take a product, connect it to the Internet of Things, and then sell it for more without caring for security.
Yeah, exactly. So how? I mean, you say we have to. Trust. We have to trust the stuff that comes from other countries, let's say. But is there a way to somehow regulate that? Because you have to test, to check. It takes a lot of time and effort to.
But that is what we have to do, and I completely agree also with Marielle. We need European regulation that tells that devices that are allowed to operate in Europe, what they have to do. And I think one of the aspects is to accept that if you buy something, it may be secure at that moment, but it might not be secure in 1 year from now. So any device that doesn't have a decent security update strategy is immediately out of the question.
Exactly. Okay. So that could be the solution then, maybe, Marielle, also to have very strong regulation. And that's maybe actually also what the EU is quite good at, maybe as the only place in the world where we do that. Do you think, Marielle, that the way in which the EU is handling the regulation of the internet and internet-connected devices is strong enough? Or would you say that, more could happen than we are already doing in the EU?
Yeah, I think more could happen because there are all kinds of security standards. So if you want to bring a product on the market, you have to comply, and compliance is also a big thing for companies. But still, it's often the case that the technical depth, in those standards, so the technical tests that a product should undergo before it's allowed on the market, that is not very strong. It's often about governance and checking the right boxes rather than a true technological review of a product.
I see. Wow. Okay. Well, this is actually quite a heavy topic, I think. But I learned a lot. So the internet is in the hands of big tech companies who are hard to regulate, and we maybe don't even want it because they're so smooth and easy. The Internet of Things is even more dangerous. But there is an alternative, and maybe we should all fight for that. And that might be the EU, our own devices. We are left to our own device. Maybe that's the kind of conclusion that we should draw.
That's also part of Hotel California.
Exactly. Mariella, thank you so much for being with us and for sharing all your ideas. Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Then it's now time to move to our students, because of course not only our staff is working on these issues, but our students as well. So as I said at the beginning already, Diederik Bakker, Olaf Haalstra and Jasper Boot make a very successful podcast, What the Heck? And in this podcast they explain very complex issues of cybersecurity in a very accessible way. So let's watch.
Why did you start the podcast series What the Heck in Dutch last year?
Yes. I think there's two main reasons we did that. The first one is that we found ourselves with a lot of free time on our hands at the start of the corona crisis. And there was no Dutch podcast yet on cybersecurity, especially not one that was accessible to the general public.
Your target group is the general public, not students, not experts on cybersecurity. Why?
Because I think that for the experts, the cybersecurity world is well known, kind of. But I think for the general public, there's this magic layer on this subject, which is a bit of a shame, because that makes that a lot of people don't exactly know how they should protect themselves, I think, against digital threats.
While studying, did you also hack organizations?
Not organizations, no. That would also be considered a crime if you don't have permission. But what I did do is that I attended a lot of capture the flag competitions, which are actually a sort of games in which vulnerable applications are exposed to you. You can hack them and you get points in that way. So that's a very fun way to actually learn about hacking whilst also not doing anything illegal.
And what kind of hacker are you?
I'm an ethical hacker. I won't do any harm.
And an ethical hacker, what's your definition of it?
Someone who hacks for good, who helps organizations in defending themselves against malicious hackers by trying the same techniques, but actually reporting your findings and helping in improving defenses.
Do you have a useful tip for the audience of campus talks?
Don't reuse passwords amongst various services. And to really make this possible without having to remember thousands of passwords, I would really suggest you to use a password manager. Doesn't matter which one, but just take a random password for each service. Don't reuse your password. This is very often how people get hacked.
I think a good one is to check yourself on haveibeenpwned.com. It's a website that collects data leaks. And you can enter your email address or your phone number and check whether you're part of those data leaks.
And if you want to be even more secure, there's also a website which I can tip you. It's called the Security Checklist. And you type that in as security checklist, a dot, and then the S and the T as an extension in your browser. And they give this tip, but also a lot of other tips how you can secure your personal life a bit better.
In the podcast, you always have a word of the month. What's your favorite word of the month?
I thought Citrix-file, Citrix traffic jam was a very good word. there was a vulnerability found last year in a remote working solution called Citrix. And lots of companies had to shut down that solution. So many people had to show up physically at work. And that caused several traffic jams in the Netherlands.
We even chose a word of the year, and I think that's also my favorite word, and that's actually Zoom bombing.
Thank you for this interview, Olaf, Jasper and Diederik. Good luck with your podcast.
So that was cool, amazing. Students who have all the energy in times of the virus to do these wonderful things.
I'm proud that we have such
Yeah,
students.
I can imagine. It's actually always, and I say this every episode, but when I see students doing all those nice things, you really realize how much you miss just the interaction with each other. So I hope to see them again really soon. So did you ever try to hack a system, Aiko?
If you look at the hackers there, you see they are all young. I'm basically too old for that.
Okay, so you have never even tried ethical hacking?
Nah, not really. If you look at the things that these students do, they are better in that than I am.
And I mean, is ethical hacking something important, you think?
I think it's absolutely important, and it's also something that we can be proud of in the Netherlands, because the Netherlands is one of the countries where we promote this a lot. Even if you look at NCSC, there's some people, Jeroen van der Ham, who is also part-time at the university, is really pushing that. And for other countries, we are an example of that. And so I'm really happy that we have that in the Netherlands.
But of course, these people run a risk as well, because you might encounter a fine or even worse if you do that.
Not precisely. There are laws in the Netherlands that allow you, under certain conditions, to do this kind of stuff. Okay. And so if you do that in the Netherlands, basically it is relatively safe, but it depends a little bit on what you do. But if you start to hack Russian servers and you go for holidays after Corona is over to Russia, you might be
a very long holiday.
Yes.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, so don't try this at home. That's the advice. Well, maybe you should try it at home, but not in Russia.
Know what you're doing.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you. Okay, so let's move to something more cheerful, maybe. Jazz dance. So let's see what Chassé, our own student jazz dance association, has made as a cultural contribution for this episode.
The French are glad to die for love. A kiss on the hand may be quite continental, but diamonds are a girl's best friend. A kiss may be grand, but it won't pay the rental on your humble flats or help you feed your pussycat. Men grow cold as girls grow old, and we all lose our charms in the end. But square cut or pear shape, these rocks don't lose their shape. Diamonds are a girl's best friend. Tiffany, Cartier, cause we are living in a material world, and I am a material girl. Cause that's when those louses go back to their spouses. Diamonds are raw gold. Friend. Cause we are living in a material world, and I am a material girl.
American, Russian themes in James Bond. Maybe the whole idea of Europe as the third way between, well, the East and the West, it comes together in this nice movie. Do you dance, Aiko? No?
To protect others, let's not do it.
Maybe I have the same problem, but I do like jazz. So maybe that's kind of a consolation for myself. Well, this takes us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for all the insights that you shared. It was, as always, but now also live here, a pleasure to speak with you, Aiko.
Also, I find it a real pleasure, and so I enjoyed it.
Wonderful. So I hope to see you again soon, and I also hope that you have enjoyed this episode at home. This was actually the one but last. We have one to go for this season, which will be online live at the 1st of June. I hope to see you all then. Stay healthy, stay tuned, and hoping to see you in June. Bye-bye.